everybody. I'm Kevin Sander. I'm the Program Director for SSP Finance and Procurement, and the purpose of this video is just to talk to you about finance changes as we move to our new system, our new finance system, Agresso, how coding will be impacted, and to bring to life with some examples how Finance MI is going to be a lot better. So this first slide just talks about some new terms and new concepts that I'd just like to start getting you familiar with. Cost center, as it says on the slide, just a group of related income and costs. It'll be the level at which we budget going forward into the new system, and it's nothing more than a combination of property and function. So function is the two-character bit of the existing Aptos budget code that says the type of thing that's happening within a property, whether it's gardens, estate, mansion, things like that. Functions that we're moving everyone onto in the Agresso system will be standardized across properties, and that's all been driven out as part of the cost center mapping exercise, which finance business partners have been doing recently with GMs and heads of consultancy. We are looking to move everyone onto a standardized list of functions. That ties in with the first new concept listed about halfway down the slide around function codes. Over the 15 years or so that we've been using this system, Aptos, it's the bit of the budget code that properties have been able to most easily influence and adapt for their own purpose. And so what that means is that over the course of that 15 years, we've had a load of very unique property-specific functions set up. And we've also had standard functions which have started to be used for all sorts of different things, to be used very inconsistently. And that's one of the main reasons that the quality of our finance MI is undermined at the moment. So we'll also start talking about account code. Account code is exactly the same as nominal code if you're used to that term. They can be used interchangeably. So we'll have a cost center and an account code. And when we stick those two pieces together, we start to build up our chart of accounts. So the chart of accounts is effectively the new term, the Agresso term for budget code. So the full string of different bits and pieces that we need to code a transaction to. The other two new terms I've got listed there are cost center owner and approval group. So between them, they're the things that will replace the term budget holder. One of the reasons that we're changing terminology there is because, as it says down under new concept, we don't have to code budget holder into each transaction individually in the new system. It's got much more sophisticated functionality around managing the approval matrix. We can effectively build the scheme of delegation in the system. So when transactions go through and require approval, and that's where the approval workflow, the third new concept there, kicks in. When transactions go through and require approval based on the cost center that we're coding the transaction to and the value of the transaction, the system will work out who in the scheme of delegation it should send stuff to for approval. Next couple of slides are just talking you through the new coding structure. So important to say at this point that this will be the level at which transactions are coded. So the HWHH code that's on the screen at the moment, that's a sample of an existing Aptos budget code, an operating budget code. HWHH is the property, so combine that with AM, which is the function in this case. That will give us our cost center in the new Agresso code. EA40 is the budget holder. We don't need to code that against each transaction. T for trust is the legal entity. That's on the right-hand side in the new Agresso structure under Category 7. And 5140, the account, that's on the left-hand side under account. So we've got effectively the Aptos budget code represented in just those three parts of our new 8-part coding structure. One thing we were very conscious of, though, is even though we're delivering a much more complex coding structure, which will support much better finance MI, it will give you much more ability to slice and dice your financial results, we didn't want to make that a coding nightmare. So when you raise a PO in Agresso, one of the first things that it will ask you is what category of spend, or what category are you looking to spend in. That category will default in the account code, so no one will ever have to think about what account code to code anything to. The one thing you will have to choose is the cost center. So remember, that's your property and function combination. If it's a cost center that you know, that you're familiar with, that you use all of the time, you can just type in the code and the system will accept that straight away. If you're not sure, if it's something you need to go and look for, you can just start typing the description, and it's a bit like Google type ahead, the more you type, the shorter the list gets until you can zero in on the property and function that you want to code something to. And as part of the cost center mapping exercise, there's a one-to-one relationship between cost center and legal entity. So when you select your cost center, the legal entity will always just default straight in. So for those bits of the coding structure, the only thing anyone will ever have to think about is cost center. We've got a few more examples of different types of transactions coming in from other boundary systems or external systems that we'll be interfacing to, just to give you an idea, a sense of how we'll use the other spare categories within the overall coding structure and how that all gets driven. So the next example is holiday cottage income coming through from the traveller system for holiday cottage booking. If it's coming in from traveller, the system will know that it should go to the holiday revenue account code. It will also post it always to the holiday cottage cost centre for a property. Only one cost center, and this is one thing that we've done to tidy up function codes. Again, just a little example of how that's worked. So a lot of properties historically in Aptos have created individual functions for all of their holiday cottages so they can try to do some P&L reporting against those holiday cottages. And then in the background, there's a whole raft of different ways that people try to allocate operating costs out to individual cottages. In the new world, we will be able to support that. You'll see that by the time I finish talking across this line. But it'll be done in the standard way, and it'll all be system driven. So initially, all of your costs will go to holiday cottages, and your revenue will post to the holiday cottage cost centre as well. The right legal entity will default in based on the holiday cottage cost centre. But then in category 5, we'll also be populating the actual cottage. And that cottage will be based on the component analysis within the Horizon property system. So at the moment, components are being added to make sure that all of the holiday cottages across the entire estate for all regions are reflected in Horizon. And that's where we'll be coding out the revenue. Also, where any maintenance costs against holiday cottages that are generated from Horizon, when they flow through into Agresso, they'll be coded out by cottage in category 5. And any other operating costs that just get coded via PO to the holiday cottage cost centre, at the end of each month will get apportioned out across cottages within a property based on number of bedrooms. And that will give us a good enough approximation of P&L per cottage if you want to drill down to that level. So it's not a level that every property wants to drill down to, but if you want to get there, it will be there, it will be provided automatically, and it will be built up using consistent logic across all properties. The next example is an expense claim. So we're going to replace the no frills expenses system. In future, people will be entering their employee expenses directly into Agresso. When you enter an expense into Agresso, there's a form you fill in with a list of different types of things that you can claim expenses for, very similar to the categories when you're raising a purchase order. Different things, obviously, but similar concept. So based on the type of thing that you choose, that will populate the account code for you. Again, you'll choose your cost center. Actually, hopefully it will default in for you based on your home cost center. If you're claiming expenses on behalf of another property, if you have a role that means you work across a number of properties, you can then just select the right cost center. Again, the same as with selecting a cost center for a PO, Google type ahead reduces the list. You can find the cost center that you want to code your expenses to quickly and easily. That will default in, as always, the legal entity. With expenses, we'll also tag each transaction with the person claiming the expense. So that person ID in category 3 will be your MyPlace ID number. Again, that just demonstrates how we're building strong links between Agresso and other systems so that when we're talking about a person, we always have the same employee ID reference. When we're talking about a holiday cottage, we always have the same Horizon property system generated component reference. So every expense claim will be tagged by person. And that's a good example of where you wouldn't start looking at that level of detail in your reporting straight away. You'd probably just look at your P&L. But if your travel expense cost has spiked in a particular month, then very quickly, very easily, you can just drill down and see that broken out by individual person. So you can see who put in the big expense claim. And if you want to understand that better, you can drill down immediately, straight away from the comfort of your armchair or wherever you're looking at your reports, straight to see the actual expense claim and to see all the details on it. So much better access to all that sort of supporting information. The last example on this slide is retail sales coming through from the new tills, from the Agresso system that tills program are delivering. So if we sell a book through a till at a property, when the transaction comes through into Agresso, it'll know based on the product type in the tills system in the Agresso back office which account code it goes to. It will also know that it goes to the retail cost centre, and again with retail and catering outlets, that's another area where we've been able to simplify the functions and therefore the cost centres in our Agresso world, because we can track individual outlets via another segment that will come through in a minute. We'll also populate week in category 3 for anything coming through from Agresso. So that means that if you're a GM and you're running a P&L in Agresso, looking at your monthly financial results per your finance accounting calendar, you can also slice and dice that information by week in Agresso, so that if you pick up the phone to talk to your retail manager or your catering manager, and they're looking at reports in Agresso, which will all work on a weekly basis, from within Agresso, you can see exactly the same results, so you can be talking about the same things without having to sign out and sign into another system. One thing just to call out quickly there is in category 3, you'll see that we're using it for two different things. For person, when it's an expense cost, or for week when it's income coming through from tills. That's a good example of how this new structure is quite dynamic. So Agresso is smart enough to know that you'd never want to code a person against a product sale, you'd never want to code a week against a travel expense. So based on the type of account code, it knows what the value in category 3 represents. That's just another example of how we can pack even more information into the 8 segments we've got to play with. We'll also bring through, against anything from Agresso, the outlet. So that means that a GM can easily slice and dice their retail and catering results by outlet if they want to see that view, and we can generate a P&L per outlet as well. Interestingly, here as well, you'll see that's a retail sale going through a catering outlet. For some properties, that mix of product and outlet type is going to become more and more interesting as the new tills roll out across the estate, and we can sell any product through any till. Finance coding structure is set up to support you with all of that. So that's just a few examples to bring to life what I mean by a dynamic, automated and more complex coding structure that's not complex to use, but will support much, much better P&L reporting and granularity of financial MI. There's 2 segments there that we haven't used yet, categories 2 and category 4, and they come into play when we start to talk about project coding. So at the moment in Aptos, we have a finance bit of Aptos and a project accounting bit of Aptos. They use 2 different coding structures. They don't join up very well. So we're addressing that with the new finance system as well. So the E123450 code shown on the slide now is an example of what a project code in Aptos currently looks like. So the E12345 is the project number, and the 00 is the element number. An element is just a bit of a project. Most of our project codes in Aptos just have 00 there. We don't make much use of the element code because actually it just supports reporting. It doesn't drive any functionality. In Agresso, we will make a lot more use of the element. The element will be something called a work order. And if you've watched the projects version of this, I explain projects and work orders there a bit more. But just understand that when we talk about coding now, and I'm going to start talking about work orders in a minute, it's nothing other than the element bit of the current project code structure. So in Agresso, when we raise a PO against a project, then as with an operating PO, it'll ask you which category of spend you're going to be choosing to raise the PO for, and that will default in the account code. The next thing that you will choose when you're coding to a project is the work order. So you'll choose a work order instead of a cost center. Same sort of Google type ahead thing as for cost centers. You'll just start typing in a description of the project, of the property, of the bit of the project that you want to raise a PO against, and you'll quickly find the right work order to use. When we set up the work orders will drive a lot of different things. So the work order will then default in the project. It will default in the cost center. The cost center will default in the legal entity. If it's a project to refurbish a let estate property or a holiday cottage, we can also set it up to default in the component value. That will support the accuracy and completeness of P&L reporting for let estate and cottages. If it's a project to refurb an outlet, admissions, catering or retail, we can also set up the work order to default in that outlet value, which will be a unit number from the Horizon Property System. So all of that stuff is effectively driven from the work order structure that we'll be creating to launch Agresso projects. We can also use the concept of project accounting to help us further simplify functions and cost centers to streamline our cost centers, back to that initial new concept that I talked about on the first slide. So another area, and this is just an example, but another area where properties have historically created a lot of different functions in Aptos is where they want to set up a function code, a unique function code for every individual event that is run at the property, so they can track costs and related income. And that's led to thousands and thousands of very unique individual specific function codes in the old system. We don't want to replicate that in Agresso, so what we will do is set up an operating project for each property so that they can manage their events that way. So we'll set up an events operating project, and when someone wants to raise a PO to spend money against an event, and coding revenue against events will work in a very similar way, driven through the till system. But if someone's raising a PO against an event, they'll choose the category of spend, that will default the account code. They'll choose the work order relating to the event that they want to code against, and as for normal project spend, that will then default in everything else. By doing it this way, we can still create visibility of income and costs against each event. We can let you report by work order against each event, but what we don't need to do is create thousands of mini cost centers for every individual event. We can track it using the power of project accounting. The other really nice thing about doing it this way is that whilst most of the values, the values within each of the segments of the chart of account structure will be maintained by thin data, work orders are the exception to that. So work orders you'll be able to create and set up and maintain at property. So when you want a new work order, either for project or for an operating project like managing your events, you'll just be able to create that yourself on the spot. There'll be no delay. So that means that you'll be able to code transactions to the right place. So when we bring all of that together, we see the complete account code structure, chart of account structure in Agresso, and the main message there then is that it's a single coding structure that supports both operating and project spend. So that was finance changes in a nutshell, bit of a whistle stop, I know. I hope it was useful. If you've got any questions on any of this, then talk to your GM or your line manager, or talk to your Sprite or a member of their team within your region. I hope that was useful. Thanks for your time.